statement, at least in the NIV of Psalm 26 verse 1, the statement is made, judge me. In other words, the idea in the NIV is vindicate me. Now, I believe the King James Version says judge me, but the NIV, in a more contemporary way, says vindicate me, O Lord. In other words, King David, as if to be identified with his descendant Jesus, is saying now to God, judge me, but find me to be righteous. Vindicate me. Find me to be innocent. Why? Because he says, I've led a blameless life. Well, that's what you have to do to be right with God by the standards of the law. You have to live a blameless life. And he's saying in Psalm 26:1, vindicate me, O Lord, because I've led a blameless life. Well, how have I led a blameless life? Because he says, I've trusted in the Lord without wavering. In other words, one of the contemporary things in translation called the NIRV, a simplified version of the NIV, says, I've never doubted you. So to trust in the Lord without wavering is to never doubt him. And there's only one person, in my opinion, that can really be honest with themselves and say, I've led a blameless life. I've never doubted you. I've trusted in you without wavering to the extent that I was faithful, that I was blameless, that I was completely obedient. That person to me is Jesus, the descendant of King David that wrote the psalm. Psalm 26 verse 1. Vindicate me, O Lord. Judge me righteous by the standards of your law, because I've led a blameless life. I've trusted in you without wavering. My trust led me to be obedient consistently. So based on this idea, would it be his trust that gave him the status of being right with God's law? Or would it be that the trust led him to live a life of obedience and faithfulness, which faithfulness would be the basis of being declared righteous? The trust led him to the faithfulness, and the faithfulness is the ground of declared righteous status. So Jesus is the only one, in my opinion, that really has the consistent faith to live the blameless life from that trust as a source. And I don't have it personally. Bob Bute doesn't have it personally, because I still relate to Romans 3:23, having sinned, I continue to fall short of the glory of God, because I doubt him. I relate to the prayer of Mark 9:24. You remember Mark 9:24? Lord, I believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. I still relate to Mark 9:24. Yeah, I believe, and yeah, in Galatians 2:16, I believed into Christ Jesus, but I still relate to the second part of Mark 9:24. Lord, help me overcome my unbelief. And the Greek is an interesting way of putting it. The imperative mood is used in Greek, which imperative mood means, Lord, it's not an option. You got to help me with my unbelief. In other words, you're putting it on God and you're saying, God, it's required of you that you help me overcome my unbelief. Because unbelief is my own nature. Jesus Christ's nature is to trust. Jesus' nature is to have confidence in the living God working in him to produce righteousness. And that's not my nature. My nature is to doubt. My nature is to waver. So here we are understanding tonight that when we're going to examine what Paul has to say in Galatians chapter 2, we're going to understand that all these centuries the Jewish nation was thinking we're better than the Gentiles. We're better than the sinners that they regarded the other nations to be, because in a number of scriptures, which I don't even have time to elaborate on tonight, the scriptures could be stacked up one upon another to give illustrations of the nation of Israel thinking that they're better than other people. Numbers chapter 23 would be one example if there was time to go into it, where the prophet Balaam is consumed by the Spirit of God, and he's saying, I see a nation that's considering themselves set apart. They don't view themselves as one of the other nations. Well, in that understanding of that self-righteous consciousness of national Israel, Paul is saying it's revelatory in Galatians 2:15 that we Jews by birth, not sinners of the other nations, are finding that we're just like the sinners of the other nations, because we find that even our trust is inconsistent. Even our commitment to the covenant is inconsistent. And Jesus Christ's faithfulness as the saving Messiah that he is the one that's brought God the Father the trust and the confidence to issue in a blameless life, which means that the law of God pronounces righteousness on Jesus Christ. And the fact that he is the representative of all nations, just like we got to see when we looked at Romans 5, particularly Romans 5:12 to the end of that chapter, and then Romans 6:1 to 11, we found out that it was Jesus Christ's representative righteousness that fulfills not only part of the law, but the whole law. So according to James 2:10, he scores as a righteous person in the eyes of God because he hasn't stumbled at one point. He's kept the whole law. And that's the faithfulness of Jesus Christ that is spoken of twice in Galatians 2:16, remember Galatians 2:16, where the answer is given to how God has worked out this good news to the extent that his creation, his people, his nations, his mankind, anthropos, is now given credit for being right with God by the standards of the law, because of the faithfulness of the one man, Jesus Christ, that incorporated the rest of humanity in himself. Because of his faithfulness, Jesus Christ possessing the faithfulness, Jesus Christ possessing the obedience. In Psalm 26:1, Jesus Christ being the one that's trusted in the Lord without wavering, that's issued in a blameless life, which issues in a declared status of righteousness by the standards of the law. Jesus Christ is the one. And that's what in Galatians 2:16 we believe. That's our statement of belief. Into Christ Jesus we believed in order that we might be declared righteous by the faithfulness of Christ and not by the works of the law that we have contributed, because if we have to do it, we have failed. I'll just speak for myself. Bob Bew has failed to do it by my own works of the law, because I would have to do more than just trust. I'd have to have that trust lead me to live a blameless life, which I have not done. I haven't even consistently believed God, because in Mark 9:24, I keep saying, Lord, you got to help me with my unbelief. But nonetheless, in Galatians 2:16, mankind is right with God by the faithfulness of Jesus. Into Christ Jesus we believed in order that we might be declared righteous by his faithfulness, and not by our own putting forward on the table the works of the law and saying, God, consider my works of the law as being sufficient, and God says they're not sufficient. Okay, but at the end of Galatians 2:16, he repeats a little bit at the end that no human being, and that's human being in the first Adam, that's a member of the human race identified before the cross, before being put to death for sin, as trying to be right with God by their own contribution of the works of the law. He says at the end of Galatians 2:16, no human being. The Greek would say no flesh, which is the idea no human being will be declared righteous by the standards of the law. And of course that's in the context of the standards of the law that we ourselves have kept. He's given us already in verse 16 the exception that when it's the faithfulness of Jesus Christ that we're talking about, we are given credit for obedience and for being declared righteous in the eyes of the law. But as far as on our own, forget it. No flesh, no human being will be declared righteous by thinking that I've obeyed the law. So that is, in essence, my little take on Galatians 2:15 and 16. And we'll take just one moment to catch your breath.